Today we're going to be solving quadratic equations. We'll start by looking at the steps. Very simple to do. You know how to do everything now. It's just a matter of doing the right steps. So we're starting off, we'll always set your equation equal to 0. Not equal to 5 or anything else, but equal to 0. It's what you need to start with. Then you're going to factor the equation, and you already know how to do that. Next step is you're going to take each one of the factors and set them both equal to 0. That's something called the zero product property. I'll explain that in detail when we get to class. The next step is going to be to solve each new equation. So now you have 2 or 3 equations, you solve them. Very simply, you have 2 or 3 solutions. And the last step is to take your solutions and write them as a set. Alright, we're going to start with x squared plus 2x equals 8. Now as you can see, it's not set equal to 0. So the first thing we're going to do is simply subtract the 8 from both sides, giving us x squared plus 2x minus 8 equals 0. Now we've got it set equal to 0. We can look at just our quadratic function there. And now the next step is to factor it. So you're going to need to go off to the side and factor this using whatever method you use. And when we do that, we're going to find out that we have x plus 4 equals x minus 2. Those are our 2 factors. Our next step is to take each of these factors, there's 2 of them, and set them both equal to 0. So the first one's going to become x plus 4 equals 0. The second one's going to become x minus 2 equals 0. And again, that's because of the zero product property, which basically says that if you have 2 numbers, a and b, like this, being multiplied and you're going to get 0, then that means that one of those numbers has to be 0 for this to work out. So we're going to set it equal to 0, set them both equal to 0, solve them, find out what each one could be. So the first equation, x plus 4 equals 0, we'll subtract the 4 from both sides, and that gives us x equals negative 4. The second one, we have x minus 2 equals 0, so we'll add 2 to both sides, which gives us x equals 2. So that gives us the potential of having 2 solutions, negative 4 and positive 2. The next step is to check our work to make sure we've got it right. Sometimes it can be done quickly, but here I've laid it out for you. We'll start with our x equals negative 4. And if we plug in the negative 4 for all the x's, we have negative 4 squared plus 2 times negative 4 minus 8 equals 0. So that's 16 minus 8, which is 0. So 0 equals 0. That is true. That's what we're going for. We'll try the second one, 2. We plug that in, we get 2 squared plus 2 times 2 minus 8. That gives us 4 plus 4 minus 8, which is also 0. And those are our 2 solutions. We've checked them. We're good to go. Alright, we're going to try a second example. 6x squared minus 5 equals 13x. It's not set equal to 0, so the first step is going to be to subtract the 13x from both sides. And that'll give us 6x squared minus 13x minus 5 equals 0. I went ahead and put the negative 13x in between so that it would be set up to factor. So now again, we're going to go off and factor this. This will factor into 2x minus 1 and 3x minus 5. Now again, following the steps, split each one up. So we have 2x minus 1 equals 0, and we have 3x minus 5 equals 0. So we have to solve each one. We start by adding the 1 to both sides. Gives us 2x equals 1. We divide by 2 and get x equals 1/2. On the right, we start by adding 5, which gives us 3x equals 5. We divide by 3 and we get x equals 3/5. So we have our 2 solutions, 1/2 and 3/5. And as you can see on this next screen, I've gone in and worked it out, checked them. This is a little bit harder to check because you got the fractions, but make sure you use your calculator or something to do that when possible. I plugged in the negative 1/3 for x squared, so I have First of all, 6 times negative 1/3 squared minus 13 times negative 1/3 minus 5. Well, negative 1/3 squared is 1/9, so 6 times 1/9 is 6/9. 13 times negative 1/3 is positive 13/3 because of the minus. So finding the common denominator, I have 6/9 plus 39/9 minus 45/9, which gives me 0. So that is correct. I try the other side with the 5/2. 6 times 5/2 squared minus 13 times 5/2 minus 5. So same process, 5/2 squared is 25/4 times 6 is 150/4. 13 times 5/2 is 65/2, and then minus 5. Finding the common denominator, 150/4 minus 130/4 minus 20/4 equals 0, and that is correct. And we have checked it, they both equal 0, so those are the two solutions. Okay, finally, if you haven't written down the steps, they've been on every screen, make sure you go ahead and write them down. Again, always start off by setting your equation equal to 0. Second of all, factor the equation. You already know how to do that. Third step, take each factor and set them both equal to 0. Fourth step, solve each new equation. And finally, write the solutions as a set. Now, turn the paper over and do the practice. Do as much as you can. Come in with class. If you have any questions, make sure you ask. Try to come in with a question. And I'll see you then.